Welcome. I'm Alan Rosenberg, co-chair of the Howard J. Siegal Leadership Institute. Along with my co-chair, Lisa Fishman, who couldn't be with us tonight, we're happy to have you here this evening. As you may know, the Howard J. Siegal Leadership Institute began in 2013 to honor one of our Jewish communal heroes and philanthropists, Howard Siegal. He was a top Federation fundraiser, storyteller, and mentor. Established in his memory and jointly presented by the Jewish Leadership Academy, also known as JLA, part of the Jewish alphabet soup, and the Jewish Federation of Greater Hartford, the Howard J. Siegal Leadership Institute is focused on fundraising, is open to the entire community, and is designed for both new and veteran leaders. And we have both here with us tonight. Equally important, though, Howard was a dear, dear friend of mine. Looking at all the attendees on tonight's Zoom, and we're going to have more come in as time permits, I see many who knew Howard and many who did not. So please allow me to share my memories of Howard with you. Howard was a selfless member of the community. He did what he was asked to do, and he did it well. He was a philanthropist's philanthropist. He knew how to motivate others to action, whether prompting them to do volunteer work or contribute money. His efforts were unmatched. With Howard passing away much too early, both the community and I lost a giant of a friend. He lived a life shaped by ideals, two of the following being among his most important. They are giving generously and leading by example. Those two simple but terribly important ideals have shaped the mission of the Howard J. Siegal Leadership Institute. We are so blessed to have Howard's wife with us tonight. Lois, would you please share with us a few words about Howard? I think you have to, Heather, unmute Lois.
Okay.
There you go, Lois.
Thank you, Alan. I have a question. What does Jane Goodall have in common with Federation? I'll give you the answer. This is her quote. Help the world, give money. Everyone needs to do something. Help people feel good about themselves by giving. This was the philosophy that Howard Siegal lived by. As Henry Zaks has said, Howard Siegal never said no when he was asked to give. He felt good about contributing and wanted to share that pleasure with everyone he encouraged to give. Sometimes I would listen to his calls. He really cared about the people he was asking for donations and made them feel like they would be lucky to give. He was a kind and caring person that really built his world around serving and helping people. I was very fortunate to be his wife. This May will be 10 years since he's gone. His generous spirit will be in my heart forever. I'm so excited you are all here to listen to David Phillips. I'm grateful to Alan Rosenberg, Lisa Fishman, Stuart Bear, Heather Fiedler, and Jody Angel for making this all possible. And to all of you that are here tonight who exhibit your commitment and your interest in helping others, thank you.
Lois, thank you. And it's hard to believe that Howard's been gone almost 10 years.
I know.
We miss him. We miss him. Our topic tonight is fundraising in turbulent times. Unfortunately, a topic that is very real in today's world. Our presenter this evening was also with us in the fall. David Phillips is the principal of Immersive1st Consulting, a firm that assists organizations with fundraising, planning and analysis, governance, and more. His prior positions include president and CEO of Capital Camps and Retreat Center and the Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County. There, he directed a team that exceeded all fundraising goals. He has helped raise more than $140 million over his career. As a consultant, his passion is to do important things with good people to make a difference. He's a strong advocate for kindness and positive communal culture David, welcome back to Greater Hartford.
It is wonderful to be back. Thank you so much, Alan. And before we start, I just want to add my appreciation, Alan, to you and to Lisa for allowing me this opportunity, and Lois for being on this call and explaining a little bit about Howard and you, Alan. And I also want to thank Jody, Heather, Haley, Max, Rebecca, and of course, David, for their collegiality and their kindness as we moved along this process. And Elisa, I'm thoroughly impressed that you're sitting in front of cherry blossoms as the board chair. I think that's absolutely fabulous. I'm assuming you're outdoors and it's beautiful there. So it's great to be with you all. Thank you so much for letting me come back. I'm assuming as the time goes on, you'll have questions, in which case, please feel free to put them into the chat room and we'll try to address them. And if I don't see them for some reason, because I'm on a relatively modest sized screen tonight, I'm sure my colleagues will bring them to my attention. But the other thing is that a copy of this presentation will be available. It's $49.95. No, it's going to be available. I got you, Heather. There we go. It's going to be available to you, of course, in very shortly after the presentation, should you want it. And that will be a pleasure. But let's get started, because we've only got a certain amount of time. And I want to make sure that we get through this and we have a chance for some dialogue. So the first thing is confession time. I'm a complete fundraising addict. I absolutely love it. But part of it I don't enjoy, even the no's I love, because the no to me is the beginning of the adventure. If someone takes out a court order and asks me to not pursue them, that's only about the only time I've stopped pursuing someone as a fundraiser. And today, we're going to talk a little bit about fundraising turbulence. And unfortunately, we have a living, breathing example of crisis that's going on in the Jewish world. And I just want to acknowledge the work that Jewish federations around the country, including yours, are doing to address the crisis in Ukraine. I wish we didn't have that as an example. And I hope that example slips away as quickly as possible. But in the meantime, it's a zeitgeist that we can use. It's a framework we can use this evening. So what I want to do is I want to grab the screen and put up this, and hopefully you'll all see it. Everyone see that? Give me a thumbs up. There we go. Excellent. So let's get going. I want to show you, oh, there we go. So what I'd like to do is start with sort of a session overview so you know what's coming. And this evening, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on a number of topics. There's sort of five, I think 5.5 topics. And we're going to start with some essential information around the issues and around what crisis looks like. What are the lessons we've learned from fundraising during turbulent times? How do we shift the model to take, I'm not going to say take it down somewhat mercenary, but to take advantage of these turbulent times we live in? How does the art and science of fundraising then intersect and help us with this? Then I thought I'd share some strategies and some hacks just to demonstrate I'm a cool, hip person for using the term hacks, because that's what us cool people do. And then finally, what's the challenge? I'm sure my colleagues understand you never really go into any kind of interaction without either an ask or a challenge or some opportunity to help those who you're with make a difference, step up to something or step towards something. So the goal number one, you all come from varying different types of organizations, is to have you consider your approach. Mine works for me. That doesn't mean mine is going to work for you. So the rubric I present this evening is designed to then be adjusted to make it work for you and your organizations. What's also important is I contend that right now is one of the best times to be raising money philanthropically, period. In my career, I don't think I've seen a more important period of time to raise money, but also a better time to raise money. So with that said, let's get into some essential information. The average US household gift, we should understand that the baseline so that we can really understand how and where the money comes from that we want to raise. And here's some information that may or may not be useful to you, but the average US household donates approximately $2,240 a year. And that number fluctuates up and down somewhat. But the most remarkable thing about that is that's across the entire US population, which demonstrates that the US, this country, which I'm now a citizen, by the way, 3 years in a row, I've remained a citizen, no one's thrown me out yet, is maybe the most philanthropic country in the world. In fact, I don't think there's anyone who really comes close in terms of intent, design, and passion for philanthropy. In 2020, which is the last time US Today, US philanthropy released numbers, we know that the United States in totality raised or donated $471 billion. And I want to just say that one more time, $1 billion. That is just a remarkable number, and it was up 5.1% from the prior year. There are four main categories of where that money comes from, which are important to understand. And they are individuals, foundations, bequests, and corporations. And in 2020, individuals eked up about 2.2%. That actually fell for the first time below 70%, I think, in all time. I'm pretty sure all time. But $324 billion of the 471 came from wonderful individuals, and then foundations accounted for about 19%, but again, up 17% year over year at 88.5 million. Bequests, 41.1, up 10%. And then lo and behold, corporations fell from the prior year by 6.1% to 16.8 billion. So the truth is, if you want money, you rob banks, right? So if you want to raise money, you go to the place where it's most likely that money is going to be made available. And really, it's individuals and foundations. It's not that corporations aren't generous, but quite frankly, most of that money is now coming out of marketing dollars. It's a quid pro quo. If you get $100,000 from Honda, you are not going to be driving a Nissan. Unless you really like Nissans, in which case you sort of get away with it, but don't tell anyone. Corporations are not as philanthropic as individuals and foundations, and we just need to recognize that. So the question is the sky really falling? And I went out earlier on in California, and I looked, and I actually saw three indications that the sky may be falling. One, Chicken Little was on the phone, was on CNN saying the sky is falling. There was a woman walking around, because we've had some floods out here in California, and noting that between COVID and jobs and elections and schools and the economy, the sky may be falling. And then Homer Simpson, bless him, I saw him on a street corner here, and he's saying the end is near. So is that true? Is the sky really falling? How significant is the crisis we're experiencing is the question. And let's talk about that. Have any of you been outside and seen hell and brimstone falling down, pigs flying, anything like that? I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, no one's saying they have. So I'm going to assume that to an extent, this is perceptual and reality. And when we look at the essential information, in 2020, a group of experienced fundraising professionals were asked to predict where the future 3 to 5 years might be in terms of philanthropic support. And remarkably, only 5% sort of indicated that there would be a major issue. For the most part, what we saw that was 67% suggested organizations or clients would invest the same or more. And if you look at the numbers I just showed you before, what we've seen is there has been a significant increase in philanthropic dollars being spent or being donated. the implication of this sort of study is this is a great time to be a fundraiser. It's also, by the way, a great time to be a philanthropist, because some really exciting opportunities are coming to your door. And we'll talk a little bit about later on about the art and science of philanthropy. But functionally, the confidence level amongst those who are involved in the game of fundraising is pretty high and pretty confident. What that meant was there were many organizations during the last few years who were not convinced that this was a great time to fundraise, and they cut their fundraising budgets, and they cut development staff, and they cut marketing and communications numbers. And the reality is, I think it appears that the blue skies are actually outweighing the gray skies. So if you in fact see the four horses of the apocalypse running towards you, I would suggest they're probably bringing gifts, not there to extinguish your good work. So don't worry if you see them, there's nothing wrong, it's going to be fine. As we look forward, we also need to recognize where that philanthropic growth was estimated. And the Lilly School gave us some additional data that is worth looking at. The predictions for 2022 were a 5.7% increase in general. And in these sectors, it was showing individuals at 3.9, foundations 8.8. You can read the rest. This was the Lilly School, one of the most respected philanthropic sources. And it would appear they have actually potentially underestimated the philanthropic largesse, how many people really want to step towards this and do something about it. Now, is there any doubt that significant crisis may result in people being driven to be more philanthropic? Absolutely. And that's worth remembering as well. The good news is, in case you've forgotten what it looks like, we are now starting to get together. This isn't a great example of that because we're back on Zoom, but people are starting to come out of that COVID 2-year isolationist piece, and we're desperate for it. Human beings are designed to be socially interactive animals. And that is really good news philanthropically as well. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if these numbers are on the lower, more conservative end. Forecasts are just that, though. And if you live where I do in Florida, we simply find amusement in the forecasters' weather patterns, because if we don't like the weather in Florida, we just wait 10 minutes and it changes. So forecasts are just that. And I don't know whether you ever read the terms and conditions on your Apple when you sign an Apple warranty or anything, but in the end, there's an awful lot of small print involved in this stuff. And what I wanted to do was give you the big picture macro stuff. So let's define a crisis for a second and make sure that we understand what that means. A crisis is defined as a turning point in an acute situation. So think about that for a second, right? It's an emotionally significant event or events. And it's an unstable situation with decisive change impending. If you go back to pre-COVID, my question for you is, and you can raise your hands, thumbs up or thumbs down, have we been in crisis? Were we in crisis over the last 2.5 years? If you believe we were, thumbs up. If you believe we weren't, thumbs down. Show me your thumbs. I want to see thumbs. Okay, Max is somewhat. Tom, again, some people have decided to err on the side of caution and go somewhere between up and down. Perfectly understandable. That was then, and yes, it was a trick question. Heather, what can I do? You know, the question right now is then, are we in crisis now? As we sit and speak, are we in crisis now? 2020 was a pivot, but it's not lost and it's not the same as now, right? We've grown and we've moved past. We've seen staffing reductions. We've seen budget revisions. Board members, by the way, are struggling. many of them are dealing with significant crisis or trauma, post-traumatic stress, because they didn't take board positions expecting that they would need to make life-changing decisions for the organizations that they're fiduciaries of. So we've got that. It was an unpredictable 21. And some might even say it's remaining a pretty unpredictable 2022, in large part because of world events and as we come to terms with what the pandemic is going to mean for us in terms of management and going forward. As I mentioned, we've got exhausted, overwhelmed professionals and board members. And what I'm seeing with a number of my clients and colleagues is board members who are saying, I got you through the worst of it. I really did. But now I need a break. I need to take some time. And that has significant implications for fundraising. It has significant implications for the fiduciary oversight of our organizations and the transition, smooth transition of information, as well as resources. Owners want their gifts to have impact, and organizational stability helps reinforce gift safety and a really good return on investment. So every time we see instability with our fiduciaries, whichever agency or organization you're representing, that can have an impact. So the question is, are we in crisis? And what are the lessons we've learned from that? So what I found was there are really two options that hit when you have crisis. The first option is the organizations reduce their fundraising budgets, they cut marketing dollars, they eliminate fundraising staff to save money. Option two is the organization stayed the course, they kept those staff, and they invested in fundraising efforts. If you look at what crises we've dealt with in the past few years, some of them are just quite scary. I mean, I'm thinking in 2008, I was the CEO of a Maryland-based organization, and the Cyclone Nargis killed more than 138,000 in Myanmar. In 2008, we had the Sichuan earthquake, 69,000 people. We had terrorist attacks in Mumbai, 174 people passed away. And the stock market took a rather distinct, smelly dive. And a gentleman called Bernie Madoff, who was part of the community I was working in at the time, didn't help. So we've dealt with crisis. We know what these things look like. So we've been through this. The question becomes, when you're dealing with a current crisis, what do you choose to do? Organizations slashed budgets, they eliminated marketing, and they cut their talent. What we know is when crisis hits, those organizations that kept the talent and maintained donor relationships were ready for the upturn, and they came out far healthier. Or is it healthful? They came out far healthier than those that chose to take the slash and burn route. So this is an important lesson for all of our organizations, that any knee-jerk reaction has a significant consequence. And part of it is when you remove people who are the frontline relationship builders, many of those relationships disappear. And that's extraordinarily painful from a philanthropic perspective. I think there's, and I want to make sure if anyone has any questions, you feel comfortable putting them in the chat room or just asking them outright. What are the other lessons we learn? The greatest predictor of the future is typically the past. And so the past resonates today, and these pictures on the right are indicative of the 1920s, 30s, the Great Depression. And we learned things from that which are still resonating today. And if history teaches us anything, is we should heed the past. Regardless of any perceived differences, we should heed it. And let's take a look at some of the things we've learned from crisis that have happened over the past. And I think there are 7 lessons that help frame a fundraising narrative around crisis. And the first thing is, we can't forget why we're typically helping. And that's because we have empathy for the less fortunate, whatever that might mean. We saw people in the most recent stock market crash who were lawyers, accountants, who instantly their businesses, stockbrokers. We saw them instantly lose everything. And the notion of empathy for the less fortunate became very, very tangible. The other thing is that if we really need to, we can get by on very little. We really can do that. It's the notion of wants versus needs. So philanthropically, if you're asking for wants, that's different than asking for needs. And those organizations that pivoted and said, we need this for survival purposes, did better. I can tell you, I was the exec of a camp and retreat agency that received a very generous gift from the Federation at the time. It was a $50,000 gift, which was significant for us. And it was a magnificent gesture. And I called up my colleague and said, we're going to send it back because we don't need that money. There are organizations and people who do. We want the money, but we don't need it. It, by the way, ended up being a brilliant accidental fundraising strategy because when people found out, they sent us checks saying, we can't believe you did that. We ended up actually raising more money than we gave back. Not the point, but we decided we could get by on very little. The one thing we didn't cut was our philanthropic relationship building and our marketing. People can reinvent themselves and so can organizations. Federation, by the way, is the master at reinventing and adjusting to the need. It's what it was designed to do. And so organizations that were able to reinvent themselves, no different than an accountant becoming a laborer or, whatever else you might want to think about in terms of adaptation. The point is we were able to reinvent ourselves, look in the mirror and say, what do we need to do in order to be relevant? We took risks that paid off. I'm guessing if I asked David what risks Federation has taken over the last years, any number of them have paid off significantly, but not every one of them may have done. And that's perfectly okay. If you don't stumble, you're not moving forward. But the point is we can learn from that and we can take risks that paid off and some of them won't, but that's okay. We can look out for one another. And this is, again, where organizations that are parts of an enmeshed community, of which you almost certainly are, can work together in different ways and build upon the strengths and help divest of some of the weaknesses. But if you look out for one another, both individually and organizationally, I dare say that there have been many conversations between senior professionals to support one another and fundraising staffs to support one another. There's no reason at all why volunteers shouldn't also be able to look to one another from different firms, different organizations, and help. You run towards the challenges. This is an absolutely essential ingredient to being successful and being purposeful. My belief is that when these crises happen, you have a choice. You can run away from the problem or you can run towards it. If you're a community organization, there is little forgiveness for those who run away from challenges. You have to run towards the problem. You can make it a calculated run towards. You don't want to induce panic, but the point is you should not fear change. You should run towards it. And then finally, and maybe the most important thing is, even though we may be, or you may be raising money for really difficult situations, we have to be optimistic and believe in the future, because it's extraordinarily difficult to raise money sad. There has to be a glimmer of light at the end of every relationship or process that allows us to believe that good is going to win. Typically it does. It just takes sometimes a long time, and unfortunately people can suffer in the meantime, but that we believe in the future. These were the essential ingredients and lessons from the Great Depression, and they still hold true today. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about that? Does that make sense to everybody? And you can thumbs up, thumbs down, you can give me that, whatever you want. Thank you, David. If we continue to think now and adapt those lessons to a little bit more modern, current situation, there are some really important lessons that we've learned. Raising money remotely is a challenge. It's not the same as breaking bread. We're Jews. Whatever happens, it has to involve food. And it's been really difficult doing that remotely. However, at the same time, it's not as personal doing it via Zoom, but Zoom leveled the playing field. And if you look, we've got 26 people or so here, of which I can see probably about 18. Every one of you is in the same size box. And every one of you has given us a window into your personal lives. Okay? And so the playing field was somewhat leveled by and power democratized by this whole Zoom thing. I wish I'd have bought stock in Zoom. I didn't. I bought it in MySpace. I'm still holding it. If anyone would like to buy it from me, you're welcome. The other thing we saw is that donors and staff were more willing to be vulnerable and open. That window into people's lives became a lifeline as well. It allowed us to talk about the challenges we're facing in a very personal way with people who sometimes wouldn't have given us that inkling, right? Oh, hang on a second. Did someone have a question, or was that someone just joining? Oh, there we go. The other thing we saw was the donor shift. When crisis hit, the speed matched fewer conditions and collaboration to ramp up relationship building and dollar generosity. It might have been that you would have received a gift from a person or a foundation, and they would have said, this is a 6 to 8 month process, and we want you to fill in this form and write us this report. And suddenly, it became far more collaborative. And there were fewer conditions put on grants and gifts. And that's what happens when you're in crisis. People recognize that now is not the time to be jumping through hoops. Now's the time to step towards the problem and make the grant. And that, by the way, has continued. A lot of foundations learned that they can make grants more effectively and efficiently. And in the end product doesn't diminish because they were asking people to give them X or Y information. So that was an important benchmark that has shifted and remained relatively stable. I'm hoping that you can encourage your donor base and remind them that when push came to shove, they stepped towards the problem as well and joined you with fewer conditions. And the end product, in many ways, was more magnificent. The relationships deepened. It was more. The other thing we learned is that organizations desperately need operational support. It's just a fact of life. And people were more willing to understand that and relate to it than ever before. The bottom line is that trust developed, and the rigor of evaluation, however challenging it might have been, became more realistic because we were struggling. And with crisis comes a recognition that that struggle is not the most important part. What really matters is stepping towards the problem and helping people. And so crisis dropped some of those artificial barriers for evaluation. Doesn't mean that they should always be dropped, but federations were also stepping towards those problems and providing resources with fewer barriers. And I think we've seen lessons learned there. We must leverage these lessons. That's why that's in red. If it's in red, it must be important, right? So we've got to leverage these lessons. And recognizing the gaps is essential. It's where we will grow. And the crisis that we've experienced, and some would say we're still experiencing, created openings and erased some history. So those people who we can't go to the Cohens. They're lovely people, but, in 1976, their car got scraped at a meeting we were at, and they've said they will never give again. They are open in a different way than they were. This crisis created openings and erased history, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Endowment support is even more critical than ever before. And I don't know how many of your organizations handled this, but I work with organizations that have held endowment dollars as sacrosanct. You can never touch that. And I looked at them and I said, but hold on, wasn't endowment designed for crisis? Or yeah, it was definitely designed for crisis. Well, what else do you need? Frogs, toads falling out of the sky. This is significant crisis. So many organizations understood that they could dip into endowment and it wasn't going to end the world, but it clearly indicated the importance of endowment support. It also showed that for many people, they did not have plans in place for crisis. And for organizations that have depth of resource like federations, they have plans, but for many organizations, they didn't. And this is a lesson that we've got to learn. It's something we need to plan. And I encourage fiduciary boards or advisory groups, however you're created, to take the lessons learned and say, okay, regardless of what the upcoming crisis is going to be, we can predict something's going to happen. We don't have to worry about necessarily what it is, but something is going to happen. What's going to be our response? How are we going to step towards the problem? And can we put a plan in place that somewhat predicts that? That is an important lesson. We have to shift the model, okay? And this is where we start to look at the action items and the things you can actually do. When we shift the model, we change the paradigm. When we change the paradigm, we open the door to new opportunities. And these are unique moments, and we must embrace them, and we can be bullish about it. I joke that, until a donor takes out a restraining order, I will still go at them. It's somewhat true. I have no shame. I'm proud of it. I love what I get to do. At the same time, these moments do create cracks in windows and they open opportunities. And we've got to embrace it and be bullish. We've got to capitalize on access to the donor space, but maintain the intimacy. These wonderful one-on-one conversations we've had with people on Zoom, in many ways have been more intimate than some of the face-to-face meetings we've had. Whichever way you need to do it, what we know is the more intimate we can be, the deeper the relationship's going to be. Going forward, I can't remember who was cooking and making non-dairy ganache, because they're not on my screen, I don't think. But we're Jews, and if we can meet, oh, there you are, Ruth. I hope it's going well. We want to see the results at the end.
The third one is in the oven. Talking about intimacy, you can see me baking. So thank you.
Well, the perfect example. Thank you so much for stepping into that space and allowing to prove the point. We get to see things that we never saw before. If we can now leverage that and start to say, let's meet on the donor's turf. It used to be that we would pull people in for meetings. More and more, we know that comfort level and space are essential ingredients to building relationships. So go and meet on their turf. Wherever they say they want to meet. Unless it's an absolutely ridiculous location, in which case make an excuse or lie or do whatever you need to do, but bring it to a place where they can be successful. I, myself, have never really loved Starbucks as a meeting venue, because if you're Jewish, there's no doubt you're going to meet at least 200 people that are going to want to talk to you as they walk past your table, as you buy your $7 cup of coffee, which I still don't understand the different sizes, so I just don't go in there. Markets are up. They're up and down a little bit right now, but there is a huge amount of money being transferred. I would suggest you do two different types of outreach. You you look for the people you've not looked at before. But most importantly, I would go after the people that have said no over the past 5 years. The world has changed. It's a different playing field. There's absolutely no reason why you wouldn't go back to some of those people and say, I know you said this wasn't of interest to you 3 or 4 years ago. The world has changed. We'd like to engage. Nothing wrong with that. Donors want compelling reasons. They want an impact narrative. We have seen over the last 10, 15, maybe even 20 years, a major shift in the way people are giving their philanthropy. They want to touch and feel the product. They want to know that the people spending the money are of significant ethic and value. And they want to know that the impact narrative is real. And it's better to tell them you failed at something than to tell them nothing at all. It's a very healthy thing to be transparent and open in your compelling rationale, in your impact. And finally, competitive fundraising requires a strategic approach. If you're not strategic, your competition is. And there's nothing wrong with being in competition. I don't believe there's actually competition for philanthropic dollars in the same way that people think about it, because people of real significance, they can give whatever they want to whoever they want. We shouldn't worry about that. But you are in a competitive environment with lots of people asking for money. So your rationale, your reason simply has to be better. And if it's not, you won't succeed. As we shift the model, I want you to think about the following for your organizations, because these are essential ingredients that I try to use when I'm working on a strategy to solicit someone or to take a relationship along a continuum, which we usually call moves management. You're taking someone from A to B to C to D, and it's a very strategic approach. We have been providing X years of service of programs and critical services to X thousand. If you can't measure that number, that's problematic. You should be able to measure that number. The other thing is, we've got executive leadership continuity and talented staff. Show off your staff. Be proud of the people. If you have a synagogue environment, maybe it's your rabbi, maybe it's your executive director, maybe it's your staff who run your preschool. But don't be afraid to show off the fact that executive leadership continuity is really, really important to the narrative, because most people are giving to something that matters to them, but they're also giving it to a person who they believe is going to spend that money wisely and thoughtfully. So your executive leadership stability is really important. You have to have fiduciary governance with depth and commitment. If your entire board is not making gifts of significance to them, to you as board members, that's a problem. Many of you probably have minimum gift amounts to be on the board. That's certainly one methodology. I'm actually a great believer in a gift of significance being the benchmark for board members and fiduciaries. I prefer it. I also prefer the fact that board members don't just make gifts. Board members need to be given the kavod of being solicited formally, appropriately, kindly. So fiduciary governance is sort of underthought. It's an essential piece. I've never met a major donor, and many of you will probably nod your heads, who hasn't said to me, well, what's the board doing? And if you can't answer that convincingly, and by the way, honestly, that's a problem. You have facility and assets in place. Many of you are in buildings. That brings stability. Stability means trust. So it's something we kind of take for granted, but those facilities and those assets are a leverage tool. Okay. You have products that have demonstrated impact. These are all leading you, every one of these is leading you down the road of saying, why would you not invest? However you want to say it, that's what this is saying. Your reputation is intact and the brand is improved, hopefully. Every one of you, if you're in this business, has to assume that your brand is probably the most valuable asset you have. Beyond people, of course, right? Your brand is what allows people to feel comfort in making gifts. So reputation is absolutely critical. It's one of the reasons why, unfortunately, I spend a bunch of time working with organizations that have some degree of crisis. And usually the crisis was identified sometime before, but just not acted on. They let their reputation be impugned. You can't. Your values, your traditions, your culture are more important than probably anything else. This speaks to how you respond to crisis. If you've proven your ability to adapt and respond rapidly, that gives me confidence as a donor that you're going to do that in the future and that my money will be safe and not spent frivolously. Again, you're building trust in my mind. Last but one, you have year-round capacity. Any of you in organizations that are seasonally based, right? And if you are, just put what your organization is in the chat room. For the most part, organizations have year-round capacity. Even our cyclical entities, for example, summer camps, they may have their main program, their flagship place during the summer, but they are still a year-round entity that's having impact. They are still building relationships, helping people, stepping towards problems. Don't ignore the fact that you have that year-round capacity. This is really important that you have a trusted reputation. And I'm going to use the example of summer camp for a second. All of these are legitimate pieces for you to do and talk about if you're a summer camp. Are they legitimate for you if you are a synagogue, if you are a Jewish family and children's service? I want to know. I want to hear from you guys. Do all of these resonate? Because if you're a camp, they are. That is a lightsaber, because you are Jedi Knights of fundraising. And if you are going to be Jedi Knights, you need to understand the assets you have at your disposal. Do these ring true for you? Any thoughts or comments? I want to give you guys a chance. I'm going to take a quick drink. Those elements ring true. I've got head nodding, which is good. Anyone want to put anything in the chat box? I'm a social worker. I can deal with silence for a long time. Okay. If you want to put something in the chat room, you go ahead and doing it. You go ahead and do it. Patty, I gave up. I saw you nodding, and I love your wallpaper, but clearly you weren't going to step in there. I was going to pick on you, and I thought I shouldn't. There are two types of model that we can adopt, right? There's a transactional model where the focus is on wants and the dollar amount matters more than anything else. And there's modest donor connection. It's unpredictable. Oh, hold on. Heather Rubin Fielder raised her hand. You go for it, Heather.
Alan Rosenberg put something into the chat.
Oh.
How can a Zoom meeting be more intimate than a face-to-face meeting?
It's a great question. And I think it's about how you set the meeting up. If you set it so that it's only about business and you have a 30-minute call, great. What I tell the folks I work with is assume that 20% of that call should be about getting a comfort level with the individual and talking. So yes, it is very challenging to make these calls intimate. But if there's an expectation that there will be intimacy, so I tell people, look, we're going to need about 20 minutes to talk through the issue, but I would like to take 10, 15 minutes to catch up and see how you're doing. There's nothing wrong with that. I put people on notice that that's an expectation for these calls. I build it into the time. It's not perfect, but what it also can be about is saying, wow, Heather, Zoom is nowhere near as much fun as seeing you face to face. But if we were face to face, what would you want to tell me? Is it any different? address the elephant in the room. Talk about the fact that it's more challenging to have these conversations via Zoom. And what you'll see is people will come out of their shells and actually want to talk about it because you're inviting them towards the issue. So that transactional piece is really one-dimensional, and it's a very near-term sort of attitude. The strategic focus. Charles, did I say something to offend, or you just wanted to stand up? I want to make sure. Okay, because you suddenly went all blurry, and I was worried about you. But I think you're going to be okay. Strategic is a focus on needs. It's the utility and impact of the dollars matters more than the amount of the dollars. And it has ongoing donor connection. It's far more stable in crisis, and it's deep and long lasting. So each of these has a risk and reward ratio. I just want to show you and give you a sense of what that looks like. Because when you compare the risk reward ratios, it might persuade you that your model needs to shift. So for example, in a transactional relationship, the risk ratio, and you can see it up here, is relatively low. It's sort of on the low end. But consequently, you're not doing anything spectacular. So the reward level is also, to be fair, kind of between middle and low. It's modest at best. The strategic risk ratio is clearly higher. The more interaction you have, the more connection you have, the more likely you are potentially to make a boo-boo, which is a technical term, or there be a mistake or something go wrong. So yes, your risk ratio goes up, but look what happens with the reward ratio. The reward ratio is off the charts and heading towards the high zone. Strategic means the glass is half full and your thirst is quenched. The risk reward of being strategic is clear and it works. And so when I was a young fundraiser at United Way in Pittsburgh, we were very transactionally based. It was about the money. It was about an annual campaign. It was about the money. And there were 4 gentlemen who started a firm called 4 Systems. And they developed asynchronous transfer modality, which I'm sure all of you are very, very familiar with. That's where the internet moves your information. And these 4 young people, actually it was 3 young people and a professor, created a technology that they then owned because the US Navy changed the way they do bidding. So to cut a long story short, these 4 people's names were on the wall of United Way. No one could get to them. It had been 3 years. They were multimillionaires. No one could get to them. I happened to be having yogurt with my son for his birthday in a TCBY yogurt. I'm not even sure they still exist, but if they do, that's where we were. I'm sitting on the floor because there were no chairs, and another guy was sitting on the floor next to me, and I kept looking at him, and it became apparent that he was, oh my God, he was one of the 4. His name doesn't matter, but he was one of the 4. And we got chatting. And when I went back to the United Way offices, it turned out my boss, I told her who I'd seen, and we were chatting. And she went and told the chief professional officer. And we had a whole meeting with a whole bunch of people. And they were so incapable of moving from transactional to strategic. Joyce, my then supervisor, said, David, what do you want to do? What's the strategy? Because I kept saying we have to have a strategy. And my strategy was to send him an English Mars bar, because he was from England, and to say, I hope you had a really good time in TCBY. I'd love to chat with you. And the room erupted. That wasn't what they saw as a strategy. By the way, it turns out that I got a note back from Robert, his name's Robert, about 2 weeks later saying, I'm allergic to chocolate, but we should meet. And it turns out that Robert became $1 million donor to this program because we kept an ongoing donor connection. He said to me, you're only interested in the money. And I said, I'm not only interested in the money, but I'm not going to lie to you and say I'm not interested in the money. It became a strategic piece of work that leveraged another $2 million and an ongoing campaign. The risk-reward ratio was significantly higher than anything else we'd ever done before, and reward dividends. This is a critical model shift that I'm going to ask you to consider. And Heather, I'm going to get back to Ruth's question in a moment around a board member. And Sandra, you've got your hand up, so you go for it. Just unmute yourself and ask your question. Can you unmute? Bottom left or top left, depending on where you're looking. Or maybe someone can unmute you. There we go.
Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to thank you because I have written maybe a third of my high holiday speech from what you are saying. And
Oh, I thought you were going to say for a second, I was so bored. I've been writing my high holiday speech, but thank you. That's very kind.
no, your notes up and just a word here and a word here. And that's what I've been doing. If you see me looking down, I'm writing. So most of the suggestions that you are making are one-on-one and the phone calls. What about the good old-fashioned big of dinners with sponsors and
Right, special
everybody
events.
getting together and making a program that somebody can see their name and feel good. Do you still endorse that type of fundraiser?
Yeah, I actually do, but I think of it differently. So again, if it's a special event that's transactional, because this model works both for individual outreach and special events. The model works regardless of what type of activity you're going to do. If your event is transactional, meaning please come to our event and give us $250 for your ticket, and there'll be an auction, and thank you very much. That to me is one-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
If the event is, please come, we want to educate you about what we do, and while your ticket is important, it's not the end result we're looking for. What we want you to do is leave better understanding. So 90% of the people in the room will have some degree of capacity, but 10% of the people in that room will have significant capacity. The question is, how do you follow up? How do you go from point A, B, and C with those individuals? How do you identify them before? How do you make sure they're sitting in the right place? How do you make sure everyone has a good time? I've been to events that have celebrated good things. I've been to events that have acknowledged awful circumstance. They can still be uplifting. The real challenge, Sandra, that the last few years have demonstrated is organizations that were special event focused were in real trouble. If you're an organization where 50% of your money or more is coming from special event related items, that's a model that you want to examine and say, we can predict that could be problematic in the future. So how do we deal with it? The best events I've been to are ones that are overproduced and over-strategized because they work. One of the agencies I worked at, we would do a gala every 3 years, not every year. And we would take the hotel and we would outrageously overproduce the event. That people came out saying, I want to go to that one. Are you doing it next year? And we'd say, no, we don't do it every year. And when we honor people who actually should be honored. They were important to the storyline, not just a wealthy person who's going to leverage wealth. It's easy for me to say that. That may not be how you are able to do these events. Not every size fits everybody. But if you can be more strategic, it will definitely take more time. It will definitely be more risky, but you will reap the reward. And if it's okay with you, you sort of set me up with a beautiful softball. So thank you very much. And by the way, you can send me some kind of commission for helping you write your high holiday sermon. I'm very, very inexpensive, but just send the money. Cash preferred. Not every giver is a donor, and that's to this special event model as well. It works there as well. Givers respond to a need and or an offer, and they're typically episodic in nature. That's transactional, right? So if a friend says, come to my gala, sure, I'll spend the $200 for the ticket. I'll come. I'm not sure I really care about what the issue is. I'm transactional in nature. I'm a giver. What you need is donors. Donors engage because they believe in the mission and the vision. They become long-term supporters. They ultimately have passion for what you're doing. Givers to donors is the secret source of everything you need to do to be successful. And here's the difference. It's a nuanced approach, right? I want you to consider this as a nuanced approach. If you can understand what a donor wants, and you can see that on the right, they want a worthwhile project. They want an overlap with their interests. They want honest feedback. The worst thing you can ever do is tell a donor that everything is so fabulous, we've never had a problem, everything is great. Because I don't know about you, but I'm a skeptic. The glass is nearly always half full in my life. I don't believe someone who says that they're skipping through and they've got a bird sitting on their shoulder singing to them. I don't trust that all the time. I'll trust it to an extent. An ongoing communication, hands-on opportunities to experience or witness the product, a personal approach, and value for money. I want to know that ultimately my gift is making a difference and it's good value for money. And you can see that research demonstrates you have about 60 days from first contact to convert a one-time donor into a recurring giver. So you think about your special events or your interactions with people. You can't have a one-time event with no follow-up, or the follow-up be 6 months later. I'm pedantic about this. If someone's attended an event, within 24 hours of that event, I want notes going out to every single person thanking them. By the way, including the organizers, the people who sat on the committee, the staff, don't care who it is. Everyone needs to get that. The revised and nuanced approach is use a team approach to identify need. It can't just be one person saying, we need this. Can't be a board chair just saying, we need this, or an immediate past president, or any named title person. When needs are identified by a team, they are always more robust. They are always something that people can gather around. There are champion leaders who can suggest needs, and we should respect those people. They're smart people. But if it's just one person's voice, that's a problem. It should be mission and vision focused. A lot of organizations have mission creep, where they go outside of the rubric, which is comfortable for them. Be careful of that. If you can't write it down and create an impactful narrative, then it can't be that good. I'm a great believer that if you can't put it in writing, then it doesn't exist. It's not in writing, it doesn't happen. So there's not a single strategy, activity, action that you shouldn't be able to write even if it's a paragraph or two about, that you can gather around. It should be relationship based. You can read the rest of these. I don't need to bore you with me selling them to you. But if you look at this, you'll see the symbiosis between these two columns. They actually match one another. And you take donors to givers. They become donors, not just givers. Oopsie. Which is the most important thing, right? They all filter through the importance of donor trust and transparency. Trust and transparency are the two most powerful words other than guidance and counsel, which is what you ask someone to give you when you want to go meet with them. And by the way, for people who say, I don't like to ask for money or it's not comfortable, I've always thought it was an honor to ask people to make an investment in something. And I've actually framed it that when I ask someone to make a gift, I tell them that it's going to impact the lives of the recipients, but actually it's going to impact the life of you, the donor, in many cases more significantly than the recipient. And I invite them to do something that's going to change their lives. So is to understand the difference between the transactional and the strategic from an organizational point of view. Again, whether you're running a large organization, a small one, it doesn't really matter. This is what a transactional relationship looks like. You have a development department that doesn't fit with the program people, nor is the sporadic outreach really fitting. And then they have an NSO. NSO is a dangerous thing. An NSO is the next shiny object. Okay? If you go after the next shiny object because someone thought it was a great idea, it will never really work out for you. It's got to be consistent with who you are ethically, morally, from a organizational point of view. Actually, I had a chief professional officer where I worked once who we used to call him Bumper Sticker Bill, because whatever was on the bumper sticker of the car in front of him became the next great thing we had to do. And it was painful. I think one day we were trying to save dolphins from tuna nets, and we were in Pittsburgh. It just wasn't really an issue in Pittsburgh. No fish survived the Monongahela. It just wasn't possible at the time. So be careful of next shiny objects. What you really want is this model. You want your financial resource development team or volunteers to fit beautifully and to talk cohesively and often with the program design people, and the program design people to feel a responsibility to the fundraising folks. You want the evaluation to be based on shifts and changes and be accurate and formulated and responsive and measured communication that is strategic in nature. There is an art and a science to doing this, and that's what we're going to look at. I think we've got about 10, 15 minutes. I'm going to say 15, and just keep going and just be a devil. You'll be fine. And Jody just texted me and said, you've got 10 minutes, and if you don't stop, you're in deep trouble. And Jody's kind of scary, so I'm going to do that, 10 minutes. The art of fundraising is that it's micro in nature. It takes real investment. It's real relationships. It's something reserved typically for your top donors. And science helps. I'll tell you about that in a second. Science is a macro level approach. You're leveraging technology. How many of you send out emails to lots of people? Yes, that would be a yes. Thank you very much. If you get an email that says, "Dear friend," does that resonate with you the same way as one that says, "Dear Judith," or "Dear Haley," "Dear David"? No, of course not. I actually will ignore emails that say that, because what that says to me is that they haven't understood how to leverage technology. And if they can't leverage technology, are they spending my money wisely? So for me, principal rule, don't ever send out anything that says "Dear friend," ever. If you've got a database and you can't work out how to get it to pump out individually feeling emails or letters, don't. It should appear personal. That's the point. Everything we can do things that 30 years ago you couldn't possibly have dreamed of doing to make things look really personal. Do it. It should go to all donors. That's the idea, but nearly all donors. Because again, what I would do is I would sequester off the top 10% donors, and instead of them receiving that blast email, I would remove them. I would take that email and forward it to them with a note that says, "This is what the peons are receiving, but you're so special to us, you get a note from me." It's not actually what I would say, but that's the indication. And so they still get the information, but they get the art of knowing that they are just a touch more special. Art helps. How does art help? It helps because if you've got a smart IT database administrator who knows what they're doing and a good series of research, you can, in fact, take your database and do some what I call data diving. And if someone's been giving you a gift 4 years in a row, and you sort against the zip code where the average home price is 3.6 million, you might want to go talk to that person or do a little bit more research on them. So use the science to identify the art. This only happens if you have the following 3 things. You have to have the resources to execute it. So you have to have good systems. You have to have great software. You have to have people who understand the software and people who know to input it. You have to have the time to plan. It takes time to execute an art-based approach, and it takes real talent. And I'm sure David and any other execs would nod when I say the following. The most valuable resource right now is fundraising development professionals who are talented and will stay. Those are gold dust. You love them and you keep them, or you get dirt on them and you force them to stay. Not the best approach for HR, but something that if you have to do, this is business, right? The other thing is you have to have full-on commitment, not just from the staff. This is their job, this is what they do, but it has to come from the fiduciaries to give them the resources they need. I think it was a certain Mr. Jagger who said, you can't always get what you want, but you can get what you need. If all you do is get what you need, you can be successful in implementing an art and science program. And by the way, no one cares if you raise the money. No one cares. If you're a professional, no one cares. Everyone cares if you don't. And board members need to be understanding that this doesn't happen by magic. It's not Disney. It's not a magic wand. I wish there was. It happens because of really hard graft. And the art and science of this is what allows it to happen. And approach is critical. I call it authentic fundraising. It's how I've been able to be part of teams that raise a lot of money. And you notice I don't say I raise this money. No one really raises money on their own. If you think that, you may have some degree of narcissistic tendencies. Fundraising is a team sport. We spoke about that last time. And it's important to remember that. But the approach that I've found to be very successful is I'm truthful and transparent. I never would mislead a donor. I prefer to put them off and upset them than mislead them. I'm committed to the mission. I won't raise money for things that I do not believe in. I'm clear in terms of the expectation and how we're going to evaluate their generosity. And I fixate on the relationship. Nothing matters to me more than the relationship. Everything else is commentary. If you get the relationship right, everything else will flow. And then finally, I am really me. What you see now and my personality does not change dependent on who's in the room. It's too darn exhausting and you make mistakes. And I've seen it time and time again. So donors respond in equal measure to how you and the team treat them. So it's not just you. You can have a fabulous relationship, but if they call and say, hey, I'd just like to talk to David, and the response is, he don't really want to speak to you because he told me he didn't really care. Or even worse, I'll take a message and the phone goes dead. It's a team sport. Must be approached like that. So listen, Newton had an understanding that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. This is my equivalent. Doing something or nothing results in something. You can choose to do things. You can choose to not do things. If you choose to not do something, you have made a conscious effort and choice. And what does that mean? For me, it means approach this from a positivity prism. Your product and you are beloved. Or else why would you do this? Right? You've got internal and external pressure to raise money, whether it's your board members asking you to, your colleagues, your exec asking you as a board member to do it. There's internal and external pressure to do it regardless. So you have little choice. You might as well just GFI, go for it. We're Jews. We have to have acronyms for everything. If a presentation doesn't have, in fact, 2 or 3 acronyms, I believe I'm not allowed to do the presentation. So I want to give you a final couple of thoughts. And some of this I simply didn't have time for, and it's what it is. You'll get the session and you'll be able to look at it yourself, and I'm happy to help. But what is fundraising to you? This is a really, before you ask people for money, you've got to approach the fundamental question: what is fundraising to you? Are you a puppy or a bear? Are you going to be a superhero, or are you going to need Miralax, which is Jewish penicillin, by the way? Do you approach things as a speed driver, or are you comfortable in a really old standard car that's a classic? Are you going to eat fast food, or are you going to take the healthful approach, which takes more time? My point is, and by the way, you should know, this is the honest truth. This is Murray, our dog. This is Nate, my now 26-year-old son. Neither of these are my cars. If I ate the pizza, I wouldn't be able to sit with you for very long. So I go with the berries. I know exactly who I am. I try to understand my weaknesses. You've got to discover who you are and how you embrace it to be authentic with the people you approach. I embrace every one of these. They describe me pretty much all over the place, every one of these pictures. Relationships are the epicenter of everything you do. If you can't understand who you are and what you bring, you will not be authentic. The relationship will not last. So if I've got another minute or two, Heather, 3 minutes, thank you so much. Yeah. Donor lifetime value is something you really want to be aware of, and it allows you to essentially say the following. It's a calculation. You'll get this deck. You'll be able to make the calculation. But fundamentally, a transactional relationship, which may give you 2 years of a giver, may give you, with the same gift amounts, $1,500 over the lifetime value. But if you're strategic and you can take that relationship and make it 6 years, that same person, it gives you a donor lifetime value, a DLV of $4,500. It's obvious which one is the more thoughtful approach. And then finally, for this evening, I'm going to give you a couple of thoughts. Big, hairy, audacious goals. A BHAG is a compelling long-term goal that is intriguing enough to inspire action. So create your own. Maybe you look at your donor retention and it's 40% right now. Get it to 60. Maybe you say we're going to increase giving years by 50%. So when we look at our donor lifetime values, we're averaging 3 years. Challenge yourself to get to 6. Double your definition of a major gift. Involve others in the design and strategy of your BHAG. Be realistically relentless and be multidimensional. And then finally, keep calm and plan. If it's not in writing, it's not real. As the Queen says frequently to Prince Andrew, keep calm and raise money. Or was it keep calm and I'll give you money? I think it was the second one. Seek team and leadership buy-in, engagement and ideas. If you don't do that, you're on an island, not healthy. Reach out to major donors, which is art, and talk to them, but not always about dollars. Okay? Don't make assumptions that they don't want to talk to you. They do. Reach out to all donors using science and talk. But again, not always about the dollars. Celebrate your successes openly and often. We don't do that enough when we're fundraising. It's a remarkable thing when someone gives you their hard-earned money because they believe in you. So celebrate it. Ask for needs, not wants, and explain why. Okay? And then develop a BHAG and get going. Because the final words are, if you're authentic, if you're inclusive, if you're bold and relentless, if you're fun and kind, and you're aware and take care, these are the emotions you're going to feel. Every one of those is an emotion that should be involved in your fundraising plan, and you will have the best time. You'll have the product, you'll have the talent, and you will be ultimately successful. And now I'm going to get past that because there were some questions. That's my information, which you'll get, and you can use the QR code to access me and send me large amounts of cash. Not for any reason, which goes against everything I just told you, but just do it. It'll make you feel good. And I'm going to pass it back to my friends. Folks, thank you so much for the blessing of being able to be with you. It's been a treat. Ruth, I hope the cooking ends up being everything you wanted it to be. And thank you all. If you have any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them, but I want to be cognizant of the time, which of course I overran.
Heather, this is Alan Rosewood. Do we have time for questions? For people to ask questions, Heather?
Why don't we wrap up, and then people who want to ask questions can stay on the call and do it that way. How does that sound?
All right. Yeah, that's fine. Let me go, if I may, thank David for an informative and entertaining evening. You are fun and kind, and that's what
thank you.
That's why we enjoyed tonight.
Thank you.
I wish it wasn't Zoom so that I could be even more close to you and give you a hug for a wonderful presentation. Second great presentation. So Zoom isn't that quite as intimate in my book as you made it sound, but I can understand your position. But before we sign off tonight, I want to make the attendees aware of an upcoming program. JLA, as you said, David, can't have a program, Jewish program, without initials and acronyms. So JLA, for Jewish Learning Academy, is launching a new series for advancing leaders. This important leadership opportunity is intended for people on boards in the community who the executive boards may think are good candidates to become future executive board members. Each workshop in this three-part series will be taught by a local or national expert in leadership development, and topics will be viewed, of course, through the lens of Judaism and Jewish values. If any of the attendees tonight know of someone who you would like to nominate, please contact Heather, Jody, or Max. You may know that JLA has many very generous supporters. We could not do it without those supporters. And make sure, please, to take a look at the entire list on our website, www.jlahartford.org. And please consider supporting Jewish education, leadership, learning in our community by donating to the Foundation's annual campaign and considering a supplemental gift to JLA. Please take a minute also, a little bit of housekeeping here. Please take a minute to fill out the evaluation that is put in the chat, as your ideas really drive our program. Thank you all for being here and for everything you do to build the greater Hartford Jewish community. Now go watch your Jewish Film Festival for tonight.